See my wall pictures here behind me. I can talk a little bit about those. It's interesting how this book's come full circle, and Extreme Makeovers where it ends. Me working on the TV show, and then the show's coming back to HGTV. It actually debuts in February. I thought that was just the timing of it all.
Is that something we can talk about? Or are you doing?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So I don't have anything to do with the new show, and I did 2 builds on when it was on ABC. I don't know if you mind if we just mentioned, we don't have to mention ABC, but when it was on TV the first time, I did two builds for them. One was Pine Mountain Valley, Georgia, near Callaway Gardens, and one in here in Virginia Beach.
Okay.
Very cool.
I'm just going to say real quick, because I'm not going to edit out what we just all said, unless you can't say ABC. Because
it was reality. That's where it was. So.
Okay. I'm just going to say welcome to No Driving Gloves, everybody. You've got Derek and John tonight, and we've got a author who reached out to us who's kind of got a neat motivational story, and obviously he's got a little bit of that TV experience. I'm not editing out the pre-show conversation there. And that's Duane Cotton. Everybody want to say hi or do a quick rundown of whatever you did the last couple days?
Well, it's Derek, and I obviously have been working a lot. One of the cool things I wanted to mention on this show, because let's see, we'll air this. Have you decided when we're airing shows yet, John? Because you keep changing it.
If I can keep my butt in gear, being ill this week, I don't know if I'll make it, but I'm trying to do Friday releases, so it's the 22nd, so hopefully it comes out on the 24th. If not, it'll be our typical 27th.
Okay, well, whether this is on the 24th or the 27th, coming up on Friday the 31st at the day job for me, which is, of course, the Corvette Museum, as probably all of our listeners know by now, we are actually having a really cool exhibit opening. It's an exhibit that's going to last from basically February 1st to December 31st of this year. And it is an exhibit on the art and influence of Ed Big Daddy Roth and the Rat Fink. So it's going to be at 10 a.m. at the Corvette Museum. So if any of our listeners are close and they want to come out and check it out, it's going to be pretty cool. I can say that the Discovery Channel is going to be filming at the opening, but I cannot say why. So you may want to come and check that out to see why they're filming. And it's a really cool exhibit. We've got a lot of Ed Roth vehicles basically on the east side of the Mississippi, and all together, again, probably for the first time in possibly forever, but let's say a very, very long time on this side of the country. And we also have some cars that were influenced by Ed Roth, as the title says. And actually, the co-curator of this exhibit is none other than Tom Peters, the retired chief designer of Corvette for the 6th, 7th, and 8th generation Corvettes. So kind of a cool tie there to Corvette history. So got to drop that little nugget on the show this week.
Well, I'm going to say I've heard some background, and I heard the new Paul Tuttle endeavor with Discovery Channel is something about doing some custom Corvettes. See, Derek's no confirming or denying, just rolling his eyes at me.
You can show up at the exhibit and find out why.
So, do you have anything, Duane, that you think's newsworthy in the last day or two, or
last day or two? Yeah, I'm still living the dream. The diverse business or businesses that we're in, we always have something new. Last couple of days, I would say planning a little getaway February 1st, the weekend of February 1st, and actually try to find some snow on the East Coast somewhere so we can go enjoy snowboarding. I'm turning the big 5-0, so I need to celebrate with broken bones or something. I don't know.
I got a little bit of relief about a month ago on my birthday because I thought I was turning 49 this year, and I found out I was turning 48. I lose track of my birthday.
Congratulations!
So
you picked up a year.
So
that's the problem. That's the problem with having those multiple birth certificates you keep using for identification places, John.
Yeah, it's just a little bit of confusion, and it's my math challenges. I can't figure out how old I am, but if you would see the equations I sent off today to have put into an Excel spreadsheet because I couldn't figure it out, you'd think I was a math genius or Sheldon Cooper or something.
Yeah, but that's a surprise. You're missing one candle on the cake. It's like, oh, okay, I'm a year younger. Great.
Yeah, I didn't get any older. It was a kind of a wasted birthday this year.
That's right.
And I'm not dating as younger of a woman as I thought I was, or engaged to as a younger woman as I thought I was. Because I got younger. I like this. Maybe I'm just going to go mork for mork, and I'm going to start regressing. Maybe next year's my 47th birthday.
Yeah, there you go. Well, tell me how you do it.
Consider it your leap year.
Fun stuff.
Well, Duane, you reached out to us because I guess somehow in your life you decided to become an author and tell a little bit of your story. I do apologize because I've been ill and stuff this week, and I put things off to the last minute. I've only read a portion of your book. I haven't read it all. I kind of read a couple of chapters tonight, too, to have a little spattering throughout the whole book, and can relate to some of it. I don't, obviously we just said you and I aren't that far apart in age.
Right.
And that really puts some of the 1983 stuff that you kind of lead off in the book in perspective. But
that was a great year, by the way.
It was a great year.
Let's see here.
Yeah, do the math, Joan.
Yeah, I think we got a little Derek that year, if I'm doing the math correctly.
There you go.
Good job. Now suddenly I feel old. Sorry.
Derek and Will has a tendency to make you feel that way when you're like us.
Yeah, so 1983 was interesting. It was funny. I was riding my bike with a good friend John, and there was a group of us in a neighborhood that used to hang out late.
See, the bike was one of the specific things because I had a friend with the same bike you allude to in the book.
The Huffy Bandit?
The Huffy Bandit, and I had the Schwinn Phantom Scrambler, so we always kind of fought to have the better bike.
Was that the one with the fiberglass or the plastic spoked rims?
No, I didn't have that one. Mine was like a 78 model or something, and that the plastic spokes were 76 and 77s.
Got it.
So it was kind of the continuation. My parents didn't want me to have that. I think they wanted me to have, a bike with real metal on it. And
yeah. Well,
makes you more of a man.
Says the guy who lives around plastic.
Yeah, especially when you Oh, wow. I got that dig. Sorry, it was a little late. Yeah. But a 78 Huffy Bandit in 1983, in bike years for me when I was a young guy, was probably 50 years old, right? Because we were jumping ramps, and in the book, you'll read one part where we were jumping off the end of a sidewalk. So the sidewalk ended, it dropped down about 4 or 5 feet to the bottom of a swamp. And so we decided to set a ramp up on the end of that sidewalk. So when we hit the ramp, we were figuring we were about 7 or 8 feet off the ground, and we were trying to grab branches hanging kind of low. I never grabbed a branch, but the one poor guy that did figured out the physics of it all, moving, and branch was about 4 inches diameter. It snapped, he hit the ground, and we didn't do it anymore. So that Huffy Bandit hit the ground a few times.
I think I did a lot of the same things as you allude in the book. It's it was a different time back then,
It was different. So we're not recommending that. We're just saying what we did. Yeah, it was fun. So in 1983, end of summer, John and I were deciding, okay, a lot of our friends were on vacation right before school started, and there was a 2-lane road, but people used to drive well, they still do. They probably drive worse now, but they drive really fast on that road. So we decided, let's go in a different neighborhood. Let's do something new today. So we rode across this road, and we went into a neighborhood that we didn't typically, we'd never ridden our bike to. And as I rounded the corner and went down the road, I approached the back of this black and gold Mustang GT. Now, I didn't know what year it was at the time, 13 years old. I just saw black and gold stripes, chrome, GT, two four barrels, the hood laying against a tree, and wow, love at first sight.
Thinking back, was that like a what I want to say, one of the Hertz Mustangs or something? Do you suspect, or
It is, and so that's why if I go to a car when I go to a car show now, the enthusiasts really don't care for my car because it's the only '66 GT coupe that was originally green with a white stripe that's painted black and gold. So they, that's not a Hertz, really. So, but that's the color scheme it was when I first laid eyes on the car, and that was my attachment. I fell in love with it. It was black and gold. That was it. And as we approached the guy that owned it, there was a real Shelby hood on it. So it was the fiberglass removable hood, and that was leaning against an oak tree. And of course, I didn't know anything other than it was the hood. And I looked at this engine and the chrome, the 2.4 barrels, the headers, and all this stuff that was new to me as a 13-year-old. And it was amazing. And of course, like a typical car guy, he said, "Hey, hold on." And he gets in it, cranks it up, and high compression, big cam, so short pipes, and back then it was the glass packs, so it made a lot of noise. Fun stuff.
So was this what I can't think of? I think Spike Ferrison calls it the taproot car. Is this where you became a car person? Were you a car person before you saw this Mustang, or was this a huge revelation?
It was a huge revelation. I mean, I liked cars. Had all the little Matchbox and Hot Wheels cars, and I just liked the way. But I didn't go to car shows, and my dad used to have hot rods, when he was younger, but not since I was alive. And so the car was the why that made me figure out my how. So at 13, I see this car, and suddenly, and I write about this in the book Driven. I could see myself older, exactly what I'd be wearing, exactly at the intersection that later in the book I described that I found myself at. It was amazing. I could just see my future. I could see myself in that car. And that's what I look back on now and say how interesting that is, like knowing how the brain works now. And so it's something that you typically hear people call the law of attraction. If you can hold it in your mind, you can hold it in your hands, that type thing. And I look back on it and say, wow, I could see my future for whatever reason. That car, I could see myself driving it. And there was 3 problems. One, I was 13. I was 3 years away from getting my driver's license. I didn't have any money and the car wasn't for sale, but all those were just small details I'd soon work out.
It's just a little obstacle in front of you.
The desire to, as John and I rode our bikes away, I said, I'm going to own that car one day. And, as kids say, yeah, right, that type thing. And we ride our bikes down the road, but I knew, there was no doubt in my mind at 13 years old, I would see that car again. I would drive that car again. And so, actually what happened was that is when I became an entrepreneur. So I immediately said, okay, the car's not for sale, so I have time. I don't have my license, so that's cool. How do I start making money? Because one day that car's going to come for sale and I want the money to buy it.
And I'm trying to think of which way to go, because we're very similar in age here, and I'm thinking back into high school, and it's weird how Mustangs cross through your life. I mean, Derek, have you been involved with Mustangs at all, other than your time at Henry Ford?
Well, my time spent working at Henry Ford Museum and the 65 Mustang convertible that my dad and I own that, well, technically is for my mom, but needs to be restored still.
Okay. Because I remember that. And of course, you've got a Falcon, which is that not what became the Mustang?
That is what became the Mustang.
Because yes. I'm thinking my dad, my little Mustang story is my grandfather purchased a 64 and a half Mustang in May of 1964. Unfortunately, he was the second owner. It was bought and sold back to the dealer, and so nobody classifies us as, we've owned our Mustang. It's been in the family longer than most Mustangs have been in anybody's family, but we don't classify because he bought the car used. Me and my frugal family, but
Yeah.
that Mustang still kicks around for our family, and the restoration on it began in 1979, and we'll let you know when it finishes.
Yeah. Always a working project.
This
well, John, before you dive too far, I'm interested, of course, being the historian guy on the show, the boring guy as I'm called sometimes. Obviously you're passionate about the car. You fell in love with the car, but the moment you saw it,
right.
And it led you to have, kind of this entrepreneurial spirit and the history you now have being an entrepreneur. But have you done the research? Like, do you know the history of the car? Like, before, obviously you probably know the history of the car from the moment you saw it on, because you probably kept track of it and what it was doing and where it was, so you could always know that when it came up it was for sale. But did you do the research on the car too to know, from before you saw it at 13 what that car's life had been?
No, I still haven't done that, and it's the bucket list item. One day I want to find out, exactly what day it was built, where it was shipped to, and what dealer sold it. I do know that before, or the person that owned it when in 1983, he bought it from a school teacher in York County, Virginia. So York County, Yorktown, that area. Before that, I don't know, and I think that is the owner that painted it from its original green and white stripe to the black and gold. Yeah, so that's a fun project. That's something I need to do, and I actually want to do it. Maybe I'll do that next week. It's a good idea. Put me on something to do, right?
Yeah, well, it's for the guys that that's their day life of their job is researching cars. That seems to be the first question we go to.
Right.
So what's the history of it?
Yeah. So what's the story, right? So the story but this car, I don't know prior to me, but I know that it created. So my dad taught me work ethic, right? The man worked when he was sick. He broke his ankle. He was always hustling, getting it done. He was a great man, but there was that entrepreneur side of things that I needed. And it's strange. I look back at my life now and all the stuff that's happened. We'll cover a little bit of it tonight, today, I'm sure. But I look at it and say, what's the chances, right? You could see a car and the car drag you to your future, right? Steve Jobs said in a commencement speech, college, I forget which college, that you can never connect the dots looking forward, only looking backwards. And so I look back now and see how serendipitous some of this stuff was. But at the time, the only thing I knew was I was going to own that car. And that was, like I said, my why. My how became cutting grass, washing, my neighbor's cars, getting a paper route. It sort of started to fill in my core business owner, entrepreneurship guy. Sorry. So let me tell you fast forward a little bit. So at 16, I got my first car. It was a Mustang. It was a 74 Mustang II. It was a 4-cylinder. And so my brother had bought the car a year or two before, and it was white with blue stripes. And so we got the car and painted it royal blue, took the stripes off of it. And so I didn't have money to hot rod it. And of course, in 1986, parts for 2300cc aftermarket parts to hot rod it just weren't that readily available. So I started mixing over-the-counter fuel treatments to try to figure out if I could make it go faster. I was a dreamer, like fake it till you make it. I was dreaming, right? And so there was a local fast food restaurant at a shopping center about 2 miles from my house, and that's where everybody used to hang out. So I was driving my Mustang too, and I would go up there, and that's where the Chevelles, and I think one Fairlane and Camaros. It was mainly General Motors and a few Mopars. And back then I was a Ford guy. I'm a car guy now, but back then I was just if it didn't have Ford on it, it wasn't any good. And of course now I appreciate the quality of cars, and I like all the different models and aspects. But I would drive up to this place and have this heart of gold, right? And I wanted to fit in. I wasn't a jock. I wasn't the ladies' man, and I didn't have the hot rod, right? So I was sort of unremarkable, as they like to use in terms. And I would pull up there and hang out with people, and I wasn't an outcast. I just wasn't the cool guy on the block. And it was fun, and we would try to include ourselves and stuff. And the party would always go another direction, or people would go do crazy stuff or whatever. And we would try to tag along, but kind of get left in the dust, so to speak. And there was a lot of times, this was Friday nights, really. You went up there every Friday night, maybe some Saturday nights. And one Friday night, my buddy TJ, who's in the book, he's a lifelong friend, and another guy we just happened to be riding down some side streets like we often did. We would pick a side street, and it's 2-lane, well, it's a road with a median, so 1 lane on each side. And as we're approaching the end of it, toward the end of it, I could see the silhouette of a Mustang, 65, 66, well, 64 and a half to 66. I could see that body style. And we got a little bit closer, and you could see it had stripes, because you could see the stripes. You couldn't tell what color they were. And as we got a little bit closer, I could tell, it had GT exhaust tips. And then it was underneath the street light, and the car was dirty, so it really had a glare on it. So you really couldn't see the color until you got right up on it. And then I saw the black and gold. And if you can imagine, this car I have not seen since 1983. Now, we're fast forwarding. I'm skipping a little bit for time's sakes, but we're now 1987. So we're 4 years later, and I see this car, and we went down and turned around and came back. I got out of the car in the middle of the road. I looked at it, and I was speechless. Like, here's this car what happened between 83 and 87 was I would see the car occasionally driving down the road and then disappeared. And I would talk to the person that used to own it, and he said, I sold it to a guy, and, I don't know where it is. So it kind of disappeared from my life for a while. And when I saw the car, it was it. And my life had changed a lot. I'd started making some money. I didn't have a lot of money, but I was in that, working toward it. This was on a Friday night. So this was before cell phones, of course. So the next day I go and knock on the door and talk to the lady that's there. And it was her son's car. And she said, yes, as a matter of fact, we're getting ready to put it up for sale. Like, don't sell it, please, whatever. Yeah, it's like freaking her out, And so her son was going to call me later that day. So I had to go home and sit by the phone. Never forget, we had this big orange phone on the wall with a little chalkboard on it. And I sat there at my house watching the 3 or 4 channels we had on TV for probably 3 hours. And finally he called. And so I met with him, and we cut a deal. It was funny. He wanted $2,500 for the car. And so I said, no problem. And then when we started talking about payment, I said, well, I've got a problem, is I don't have $2,500, but I told him the history behind this car. And I said, look, I've wanted this thing. And so we cut a deal. He could keep the car, keep the title, and I'd make weekly payments. So that was my first no money down deal. And I do a lot of real estate now. And so if you look at some of the real estate deals I do now, before I read on creative financing, I'd actually created some creative financing for myself. And it was a owner financing, no money down, no interest deal, but it was on a car.
You got to start somewhere, and it's, I guess it's kind of that it only took you 4 years to almost own the car. How how many payments were we making before you finally got to take it home? Or or do we get to the story of the default?
Well, no, no default, no default, almost the default. So we had this gentleman's agreement that I'd pay a couple $100, here and there, and every Friday I'd give him something. So it wasn't a set amount, and that was the cool thing on my end. I didn't commit myself to something I couldn't fulfill. So a few weeks later, maybe a month later, month and a half later, he called me and said, "Hey, we have a problem. My parents want the car gone." So I don't have, and I'd roughly paid half of it at that point. I said, well, I can't pay the money for it. However, I'll keep making payments. So we worked a deal to where I could bring the car home and I would keep making payments and he would keep the title. That was fair. Now, one thing I skipped over, best part, I'd asked, when I first saw the car that Saturday, I asked my dad if he would loan me the money or help me buy the car. And that's where I started analyzing words people use. So he said, you don't need another car, meaning I had the 74. I don't need a 66. He didn't say I couldn't have it. He said, I don't need it. So that was my out. So
I play word games like that all the time.
Yeah. It sometimes, well, now it gets me in trouble, but with my wife. But,
it does.
Yeah. So my brother had a big F-250 Highboy. So if you know trucks, you'll know that this was a truck that had a cylinder in the front that helped it steer. It was just a big beast of a truck. So we drove down to this house on Silver Isles there where it was and hooked a rope up to it. And I sat in the car and my brother towed me home, right? We did the deal. He kept the title. I took the car and we're on the way home. And we had about a 3-mile ride. And so this car had been sitting for a while, and the GT disc brakes in the front, the 4-piston disc in the front, the drums were almost locked up in the rear, and it was dragging one of the tires at first, and then it started rolling.
So this was a restoration candidate when you bought it. It wasn't actually this son wasn't actually driving and using the car. It was just a castaway.
No, so this gets into, I don't want to.
I don't want you to tell the whole book.
No. In case the old owner listens to this, I don't want to make him upset. But so this guy would have a wiring problem. A fuse would blow. Now, this is the owner I bought it from, or the owner that I saw it with, that owned it in 1983. If a fuse would blow, and he was always wiring up something and adding gauges and switches to be doing something, he would have a intermittent short. So his idea was aluminum foil. So if he wrapped the fuse in aluminum foil and stuffed it back in the fuse blocks, then suddenly the fuse wouldn't blow. So that was his fix. And so when the owner that I bought it from, we'll call him Stan, he had wiring problems. And so the wiring harness had finally cooked to the point in the car it wouldn't run. So he hadn't run it in a while. And now this was it was a 289 block with 351 Windsor heads. And this engine had been drilled. The pressed-in studs had been drilled out for the screw-in studs, for the fulcrum rockers, and it had some problems. They weren't drilled straight, so it would wear the studs on one side and things like that. So the car had a few issues. Tires low to, I think one was flat. We had to pump it up. The windows where the regulators were broken, so the window glass was at an angle. So some rain had been getting in the car, and it had that typical old car smell. Later, I discovered below the carpet, the floorboards had holes, in the floor pans because, well, the water getting in. And we live in an area where they salt the roads a few times a year. So we dragged the car home, and I'm thinking the rope's going to break, the brakes are going to give out, I'm going to run underneath this F-250. I mean, all the stuff that could go wrong. I finally got the car. This was an amazing day for me. I mean, this started in the summer of '83. And the day I actually got it was November 3rd, 1987. And that date's important in the future. So we bring the car home, we stop out front, and my dad comes out of the house and said, I thought I told you you couldn't have, you couldn't buy that car. And I said, no, Dad, you said I don't need another car. And so that's when I learned how nice of a guy my dad was, because he could have easily just blew a gasket. And So after a little bit of aggravation, I could tell that he had with me, he started walking around the car, and the old car guy came out of my dad, right? The hot rodder when he was a teenager, and suddenly he started to see the draw that I had to this car. It wasn't, partying, it wasn't drugs and craziness and get in trouble. My desire, my hobby was a car, and I guess he was okay with that.
I've said many times that drugs would have been a lot cheaper for my car hobbies.
Yeah, yeah, unfortunately, but I looked at this and just sort of, like I said, all this stuff was, I worked hard for this and I tried and I never gave up, but a lot of this was self-propelling, right? I could see this stuff would just start to happen with this car. When we get a little bit further into the story, and I don't want it to go, too much time on the very beginning, because I want you to know that the desires that people go through with a car. So maybe you have a successful company and you make a lot of money and then you buy the car. Well, I grew up in a middle class family. I mean, we always had something to eat. We always had clothes, but we didn't do the extravagant stuff, right? So the car wasn't a necessity. This car created the lifestyle that I have today and the desires that I have today in business, life, family. It's amazing. People tell me, calm down. It's just a car.
Yeah,
To me, yeah.
I was going to try to jump ahead a little bit in the story. Because, like I said, I don't want you to tell the whole book or anything.
Yep.
But you're 17. You've got this project. You got it home. Dad's excited for it, and I'm sure Dad helped out.
Oh yeah.
But as I get bored with cars really quick, I had a friend who was very much like you, and he bought a '67 Mustang Fastback. And he still owns it to this day, and it's always been. I think he's driven it like a total of 3 miles, but. It's all, and I mean, it's nice and done, and 4 or 5 different motors in it through the years. It's always a work in progress thing. He's never quite happy with the finished project, and I think he's owned over 100 Mustangs in his life. But this, like you said, started to create a lifestyle, or started to drive you. So let's put the car a little bit aside and get into the little bit of the entrepreneurship. So you're 17, you're approaching, I'm going to say, high school graduation.
Right.
Did the car help guide you to the career path, or did you just,
Well, so here's what happened. We would work on the car a lot, my dad and I, just about every single night. So at that point, I had a paper route in the morning, then I would go to school, and then after school, I worked at an auto parts store. Then I would come home and do homework, and then I would work on the car until pretty late. That was my life for up until we got the car on the road. You know the feeling. So we get the car on the road, and the key about spending time with my dad was a few years later he would pass away unexpected. Well, not it was expected, but I mean he got ill, and so this valuable time that I got to spend with my dad taught me a lot of how to work on cars. So fast forward a few years. Or fast forward a year, July of '88, I let my girlfriend talk me into selling the car and getting a big truck. So I sold the car. I watched the rear valance disappear in sort of down the road, and I was sick. I knew I'd made a mistake. So anyway, I go on through '88, wishing I hadn't have sold the car. '89, I found out my dad was sick. '91, he passes away. At that point, I'd started in 1989 working at one of the national auto repair facilities. So working with my dad on the car enabled me to then have a job, right, to put myself through a community college for HVAC repair. Somehow, suddenly I wanted to do heating and air conditioning. So as the years go by, I get a job in the heating and air conditioning business, and I became a 20-year-old working a lot, having fun with friends, and always thinking about this car. There was a song came on the radio one day by Jeff Carson. It's called "The Car." And if you listen to it, just go back and listen to it and listen to the story for what I've told you so far. It is a mirror almost story to my dad and myself in this car. And so that started the ball rolling. And I'd always look for it, talk to someone. Well, right after I heard that song, I talked to someone that is a local hot rodder. He has a rod shop, or used to have a rod shop. And he told me, "Hey, I remember the guy you sold the car to," because he knew me from the auto parts store, and he goes, "I have the engine out of the car." So that got me into that. I found who I sold the car to, lived over in the country about an hour from me. I went over and looked at the car. It was in his yard, same way I found it, windows down, engine out, rotting away. He wouldn't sell it back, and then he put a big price on it, and so my failed attempt to get it back. Then the car disappears. A few years later, I found myself living in a city called Newport News, and I'm looking for this car on occasion. November rolls around of 1997, and my buddy TJ says, "Reach out to the guy you sold the car, track it down." Long story short, I found the car. It was 2 miles from where I was living. Um, it was the whole time I'm looking, an hour and a half away. It was down the road, and I didn't have any money. In 1996, there was one case where I went to buy some chocolate chip cookies from the local convenience store that came in the roll, and I didn't have enough money because I'd wasted money. I was in a car accident, it couldn't work, and all that good stuff. And so what happened was that was my low point. That was the physical Y or fork in the road. I decided that night I was going to take a path to success. I was going to put myself back on the path that I was when I first saw this car in '83 and then again in '87. And that night, I remember I was saying, if you think it, it'll come true. I put it in my mind I was going to find the car, I was going to own the car, and that was it. Fast forward about 7 or 8 months, November 3rd, 1997 to the day I bought the car. I actually bought the car back. I still have the title that my mom and dad had signed in 1988, so no one had ever registered the car. Amazing. I get the title, and that's just wow. The funny thing was, when I saw the car in '87 on the side of the road, when I knew it was the car, I saw the rear valance, with the GT tips. When I sold the car in '88, that's the last thing I saw. When I bought the car back in 1997, that was the only thing still black and gold in the car. The rest of it was primer, and I sent you the picture on that.
Yep.
And I saw that car, and I'd realized that during the 90s, the car had decayed, and so had I, right? So my life had decayed, the car had decayed, and now when I found this car, I promised that I was going to rebuild. It was going to be better than ever. But I think deep down I was promising myself, right? I was going to rebuild my life.
Just out of curiosity.
Yes.
As the girlfriend that convinced you to buy the truck, she's long gone, or?
Oh, she was gone. She was gone a few months after, but she was that rekindling flame that would pop up here and there. We changed her name. We called her Delilah. If you look up, in history, Delilah had her issues. So yeah, it was interesting. So it was just one of those things that my life had suddenly changed, and I became the person that I imagined I would be. Things started to change. I bought the car back. I bought a house and I say it in the book, Clinwood Parkway. So this car was on one side of the road when I first saw it in '83. The big circle was it. I now live across the street from where I first saw the car. So I bought the house directly across the street, and I have the car in the backyard. All the serendipitous stuff, the stories, the uniqueness about this was pretty amazing. It was one of the things. And so this was 1997 when I got the car back. I actually took it to my employer's shop. In 1998, I bought that house on Clinwood. And then in 2000, one day I was watching a tarp blow on the car, and I said, I'm no better than the guys who let this thing rot out in the country. I decided right then and there I was going to start my heating and air conditioning company, because I'd been working HVAC service technician, making pretty good money for the last few years. But I was making $40,000 in 1994, but I was spending 41. So I made a lot of money on paper, but I didn't have anything. So in 2000, I started my heating and air conditioning company, and I met my wife. A couple years later, I started rebuilding the car, and my goal was to have it at the 2004 Nashville Mustang show. I think, what was that, the 45th or the 40th?
That's 2004. That'd be 40th. Yeah, that'd be 40th in 2004.
So this car, the last time I'd driven it was 1988. So The next time I drove the car, literally was around the block down the road where I first saw the car, put it in a trailer, took it to Nashville, unloaded it, and we took it around Super Speedway with the other cars. We had to, get to do the parade lap and the on-track live session. Of course, I realized shaking down a car going around Nashville is probably not the place to do it. You should probably do it on the side streets. But it was interesting. I'll tell you a funny story. I had a helmet on going around the track. My neck got tight. My shoulders were tight. And I'm thinking, man, I'm having an anxiety attack. I'm having a stroke. What's going on with me? And I looked in the rearview mirror, and the headliner was swelling up around my helmet, pressing down on the helmet. So it was funny, all the stuff that can go through your mind. It was a headliner swelling up because my windows were down.
So wait, I got to ask a question here.
Yes.
If you were at the 40th Mustang
2004
celebration, did you go to the? I guess it would have been the 45th at the Barber Motorsports Museum in Birmingham.
Did not.
No. Well, then there goes that serendipitous turn, because that's actually where John and I met for the first time and got to know each other. John was working there. I was at Henry Ford Museum and took serial number 1 Mustang and the Mustang 1 prototype down for that event. And that's kind of how, I guess, Mustang connected John and I.
So you were, but didn't it rain at that event?
I don't remember.
I don't remember. I don't think so, because I remember walking around a little bit outside, and the irony is, I was going through some photos today, and I came across those pictures from when Derek and I met. So
that would have been serendipitous, wasn't it? Well, so I think I'd gotten the car back together, and there was something that I lost a little motivation. My business kept growing, and I kept doing fun stuff like that. But the car, the chase, it was not over with, but I had it. It was done. It was in the garage, and of course, read the book, because there is really good details in there. But it inspired me, literally, a car inspired me, on top of having really good parents, inspired me to then visualize my future and work hard at getting it. And I'm actually in my home studio here, where I do a lot of our YouTube videos and whatnot. The car is directly below me right now, covered up in a conditioned garage. So, and it's by the way, it's a 347, 2.4s, the exact car that I've always wanted. So it's a resto mod. The interior is the pony interior. Sorry, you don't mind here. I've got to plug in a charger and get a drink of water. So sorry about that, guys. I didn't notice my charger. Can you plug it in for me? So it was an amazing time, getting the car back. And I tell you that there was this goal for me that I wanted to build this car and make it, better than ever before. And I did that. The car that I visualized in 1988 is the car that's sitting in the garage now. It's just had newer versions of parts and pieces stuck to it. So it was very interesting.
There's something I want to say I admire about that. I don't comprehend. And I'm sitting here thinking of the people I know that are long-term owners of their vehicles.
Right.
I've got the one friend from high school that has the 67 Mustang. I have another acquaintance from high school. We had a falling out that has a 64.5 Mustang that was cool as heck in high school, and he still has it. And, my dad's in his ownership of his 64.5. I mean, it's been in the family for whatever that is now, 55 years?
Yeah. And a half.
Why do these Mustangs, I'm sitting here thinking maybe it's time I buy a Mustang. And I think if I go through, I've got other friends that have owned, Mustangs for decades. Maybe it's the fact they just can't be sold. Nobody will buy them. And
yeah.
I was going to say that, but I was trying to be nice, John.
You know me. I'm not nice. But
yeah, that's all right. No, I get it. Some people, this car to me has a value. There's more money I've invested in this car than you think, well, if you're really good in business, why'd you invest $80,000 in this car? Because it was my drive. It's what's fueled everything before and since.
You can
So
never try to quantify that. It's
you can't.
pleasure. I mean, like I've always pointed out, if you hunt and you fish, you spend a fortune. I mean,
Right.
it's money. If you go bowl every weekend for 40 years, you're gonna spend, I don't know, a bucket of money bowling. If you spend $50 every weekend that you go out and bowl, it's the same thing. You had fun doing it. And
Well, I was listening to one of your podcasts where the 1996 pre-runner, the Ford truck, sold for just over 10,000
right,
at auction, but then other cars, the Scooby van was what, 59,000.
it's
So this is my version of the Scooby van.
exactly, you get exactly what makes you happy. And
Right.
as you say, you say that the car drove your career choices,
Right.
and motivated you and brought you back from times of low. And why I'm not that drastic, because I'm lucky, we're commonly talk about it on the podcast. I'm lucky to keep a car 12 months. I just,
right.
I just get rid of them.
I mean, 2 months.
And, but that's how I ended up where I am today.
Right.
I graduated high school, went off, with the intention of becoming a lawyer, and a couple of weeks of college later, honestly, I couldn't find a parking spot, and I went home and I didn't go back for 6 years, 6 or 7 years. And
parking spot story, huh?
Yeah. And so by in 6 or 7 years, I figured out what I wanted to be when I grew up, and I could be a lawyer, and I could own 2 or 3 cars, which I now know some lawyers that own a lot more than 2 and 3 cars.
Right.
Or I could restore them and drive them all. And still to this day, I don't have lawyer money, but it's driven, and I've been able to drive them all, and I've had a very good middle class life. So
well, and I'll tell you, a few years later, I sold my heating and air conditioning company, and sort of didn't fully retire, but took some time off at 37. So think about this story, the ups and downs. In the book, we write about peaks and valleys, right? And you get that in life. You get it with cars. I guess you get a good one and a bad one, but overall, you still like your hobby. And we get to, I started in the building business. Now, right before I sold the HVAC company, I started flipping houses. That's where my real estate career began. And so from 2005 to 2007, I was doing both. So then we started building houses. And guess what happened in 2008 with the housing market?
I got divorced.
Well,
and
I got divorced from
that's why the housing market tanked.
Yeah.
And I had to sell a house in that market.
well, I got divorced from a lot of money. So we lost a lot of money in that time. And so then I went from what I felt like one of the smartest guys in 1 month to, a dummy a year later. And so our building career started. And then I had a chance to go to Pine Mountain Valley, Georgia, and help with an extreme makeover build as a builder of custom modular homes. And I went down and did it, realized I wanted to do this. 11 months later, actually 10 months later, we were in Virginia Beach, and I was the exclusive builder for the Virginia Beach Extreme Makeover build. And I realized at one night in the middle of that week, that crazy, well, actually like 4.5 days that we built 4,300, or that I built a 4,300 square foot house. It was in that 4.5 days, one night, I looked up at the halogen lights, everything going on, the volunteers really doing a great job. And I remembered that summer in 1983 and everything that happened between that summer and seeing this black car and now being filmed on a primetime TV show was a result of a 66 Mustang GT. And I know there's a lot of other factors and family and friends and hard work and desires, but that was the core motivation that took me through all of that. And that's one thing I just want to talk about, how a car can motivate you to make a lot of money so you can buy more cars or to give money away or to be a better person. Not that money makes you a better person, but so if I want to give a house away, right, that's on my bucket list. I want to flip a house and give it to someone. That all started in 1983 with a car. And that's what I think is the power of hot rodding, the power of restoring a car, the fun stuff,
It's And to me, it's a really good story, and it's interesting, and I totally see what you're saying, and now I've got to sit down and read the parts of the book that I haven't.
Sorry, I probably told you too much in the beginning.
Well, now I can skip the first chapter. But
That's right. Speed up, speed
Yeah,
read.
although you already read that. But I think, John, you're right. I mean, what I like about it is, and you run into it in the car world, and there's actually a car in the new Ed Roth, Big Daddy Big Daddy Roth Rat Fink exhibit we're doing that a gentleman built because it got him away from drugs and alcohol. And it's got a huge story like this that follows this, but it's one of the cool things I think you find in the car hobby and the car world that we're all connected in, whether it's as a hobby or as tying into your career or something. There's always these great stories out there, about what cars have done for people and what it's as you've entitled your book, what it's driven people to do. And it's just of course, coming from, again, that history background and that interest in stories and history of cars, but also just the history of people. I love hearing these stories, and I think it's good to get these stories out there because one of the things that we always talk about on this podcast is that we want to encourage the younger generation to get involved. And here we're talking to a guy that when you were 13, right?
13, yeah, 13 years old.
Yeah, 13. Saw a car, fell in love with it, and it hooked you. And that's I think there's a lesson to be learned there. Maybe the first car you see might not hook you. In your case, it did, but maybe a Mustang doesn't interest you, but go out there and check out other cars. Maybe a GTO or maybe a Chevelle or maybe whatever is going to be the car that hooks you and leads you into an amazing life and career. And that car is going to be that driving factor.
And that's what it was for me. My 8-year-old son, well, we've talked about it. I don't want this car to ever go anywhere. So he already knows this is his car one day. My two daughters, they love it as well. But my little boy and I, now we get to experience that again. So that connection my dad and I had working on it, well, now we get to do it as well. Can I tell you a funny story about a car show just last year?
Yeah.
So Virginia Beach has a pretty big car show, and we drove in there, and the Mustang guys were parked in a row, and so I drove in. It's a big building. This car is loud. It's a 347, 13.5-to-1 compression, 2.4s. Everything's electric. It's an awesome car. I pull into this, and everyone's looking around this big barrier that's there to see what's coming. They thought it was big block stuff or Chevy or whatever. And I came around the corner, and they said it was sort of like hearing the roar, but then seeing a mouse come around the corner. They just didn't place the sound and the car together. So when I parked with the Mustang guys, I didn't feel welcome that much to this particular group. And it was funny. There was a group of the next row over was Corvettes, Chevelles, Camaros. And one of the guys came over and said, "Hey, I think your car belongs on this aisle right here. That's what it sounds like. It belongs on this aisle." And as I told you in 1983, or 86, it was, if it wasn't for it, I didn't want it. Come full circle, the appreciation that I have for the time, money, effort that people put into cars. And not only that is I like the different body lines of different cars that are out there. And it was funny that my Mustang was suddenly found itself in a row of big block Chevrolets because that's what it sounded like at the time. And that was an amazing thing to me. I said, well, and I started this journey as was binary, I guess, just had this one car that I liked. And now my appreciation for cars, because of my growth as a person and appreciation for, the hard work and money that goes into stuff. When I see a car that is spotless, it's chrome, the paint job is like, candy. I know there's a ton of time, pride, skill, money in that car. And so I appreciate the effort. That's just my take on it now. I guess you get older and smarter, right?
Well, this, Derek and I have.
We're still working on it.
Yeah.
So we've worked with a lot of cars, put a lot of cars together for people, and it is a tremendous amount of work. And I'll fight it a lot of different ways, whether or not you use dollars to build it or you used your hands to build it. But it's a kind of like I said, it's a fascinating story, and it really has me thinking. That I just never put two and two together with some of these people that have owned their cars 20 and 30 years and how it's shaped their lives. And I've been quiet listening to your story, but also thinking through some of my buddies that have had, their cars that long. And I can see where it has guided and twisted their lives. And sometimes it gets put off to the side a little and then it gets brought back to life. And
it was funny when I first finished the car. We drove it to the local mall, and in 1996, remember, I couldn't afford a roll of chocolate chip cookies. One day, we drove it to this mall. There was a Saturday afternoon car show in the corner of the mall parking lot, so we drove up there, and I decided to go into the mall and get one of those $50 cookies. So we were sitting in the car eating this $50 cookie, in this car, done now, right? Brought it back from the grave, the picture I sent you. And in a time where I couldn't afford these cookies, now why did I buy a $50 cookie? And in the book, I tell you, because I could. It brought everything back. It was as simple as a cookie, for Pete's sakes, right? And so at a speaking event that I went to, we had a couple of those cookies out there, and also, by the way, I bought a Huffy Bandit. I found one on Facebook Marketplace, and so it's actually sitting right across from me here. I bought a '78 Huffy Bandit. The unique thing about that bike is it was black and gold. If you look up a picture of it, the bike was black and gold. The car was black and gold. And now I'm a Dean Graziosi and Tony Robbins, I guess, understudy of the Mastermind course. And the colors on the Mastermind course is black and gold. And so that's my story of where we're at today. I love everything. And the cool thing about this is the publisher said, can you document some of the stuff? Sure. I still have the title my mom and dad signed. I can show you a deed where I lived across the street. And if you trace this title, you'll see where it was registered to the house across the street, and it's so interesting. Somebody one time told me, I think you have a story for a magazine. And then after the Extreme Makeover build, a buddy of mine said, no, you need to write a book and inspire people that come from this unremarkable, normal seeming, quote unquote, whatever normal is, this unremarkable life of you think you're just going to have to go get a job that you hate and work it for most of your life and then die. That's not the way it works out. So I like to tell people the life you're living today was once a thought in your brain years ago, right? So your thoughts turn into where you are. And in your future, if you visualize it and keep it there and work on it, put it in your subconscious, this car became part of my subconscious, right? I didn't have to think about it. It was just always there. And so when you anchor something like that, cars, finding a car, working on cars, your love for cars or business, it all comes back to that's what motivates us, right? In my case, a car motivated me. Some people, it might be something else, and that's a good thing about hot rods. Of course, when you're at a car show, it's hard to sell motivation to people, even though one of the most expensive hobbies you could have, you need it.
Well, we're just about at that 60-minute mark, like we usually try to hit. And
That's right.
I don't know. I've kind of got a few more questions, but I think we'll hold off. I'll read the book and I'll probably get them answered.
Yep.
And it's interesting.
Yeah, we don't want to give everything away. We want people to go out and get get the book and read it and learn. We don't want to give it all away, John.
Yeah, well, let's quickly before I get into what I'm going to tie back to this and an interesting chain of events, and it even involves Mustangs. But where can we get your book? Where would you prefer us to get your book?
Well, if you go to my website, DuaneCotton.com, and it's DUANE, but DuaneCotton.com/driven. Excuse me. I think I'm catching your cold. /driven.
Well, I caught my cold from Ron White. We went to a Ron White show Friday night, and he started out saying he had a cold, and
Is this the tater salad, Ron White?
This is the tater salad, Ron White, and I walked out of there with a cold, so I don't know. And I was in the balcony seats. He must have had a really bad cold.
Yeah, I love him. He's awesome, isn't he?
I bought the tickets as a present for my fiance for Christmas because she absolutely loves him. I've seen his stand-ups on TV occasionally, but no, it was probably one of the better comedy shows I've ever been to, and he's definitely an interesting character. And when he left the theater in Birmingham, somehow a little bit later, he posted a picture to Instagram or Twitter or something about stopping by a Taco Bell, and his manager came up with the idea of giving the guy in a Camry $35 to buy their Taco Bell because the drive-thru was the only thing open. You can't walk up, and a tour bus doesn't fit through there. But
that's right. The problems of a celebrity, right?
Oh yeah.
So I wanted to say also, when you go to DuaneCotton.com, there's a YouTube video that should be on the first page or maybe second page. It populates there that of my car. I kind of did a walk around of it. So it's there. You can hear it run and things like that. So if somebody wants to see it. But I just want to inspire people. I want everyone to know that, you haven't lived your best days yet. I tell everyone I haven't lived my good old days yet. And that's the belief system I have. So
well, we're doing a little bit better with the show notes too for our listeners who have ignored our show notes. So we will definitely have links to the YouTube video and to Duane's book in there. But what I was going to go to, and it's kind of a sad note, but for some reason I'm going to tie it to a Mustang too, is we don't talk about people passing away too often on No Driving Gloves. We, reserve that for very special people. And as a matter of fact, in the 112 episodes we've done, we've only discussed Lee Iacocca's passing, which of course is the father of the Mustang.
Right.
And I don't know if this is nationwide, but I think it is. Earlier this week, a little 4-year-old finally passed away, Wyatt, and there was a big hashtag going around, burnouts for Wyatt and things. And I'm going to mention Wyatt. He's an adorable kid, and I put something on Instagram about it, and he kind of reminded the way the car community came together, and the racers and street people were posting their YouTube videos because the kid loved burnouts. And people would do burnouts and post their videos, and that's how he spent his last couple of days. His parents brought him home from the hospital when, they knew that the end was near, and he got to spend his days seeing what he enjoyed as a 4-year-old, and that was the car connection to him, and it brought the car community together in a very special way. And I think his parents, Greg and Christy Spann, I believe is their name, are taking over the hashtag burnouts for Wyatt and going to create a charity around that. And it kind of goes back to, and you really reminded me, Duane, when you were talking about trying to give away a house and giving back to the community. People like that are really why we're into cars. The cars bring us together. It's the people that keep us coming back. So
that's an awesome. How about I light them up in my 66 and I'll do the hashtag and put it all over the internet. I will light them up from one end of my street to the next.
I'm sure he would be looking down grinning. I mean, he just check out our Instagram. It's the only picture I've put up in a while, but it's him sitting on an old, I want to say, Chevy truck, and
wow,
he's just a cute little kid that, unfortunately somebody needed him more than we needed him, but he reminded us, that. At car people.
Yeah, and just think about that. That was his thing. He wanted to see these burnouts, and life gets complicated, right? The older you get, you hear time flies, and there's a reason why. Is because you're doing all this monotonous stuff you really don't like, and you forget these little things that pop up. He probably remembered every single burnout he ever saw, but his days didn't go by that fast. But One thing I'll tell you is building a house, working with Extreme Makeover was, and the show's coming back to TV, by the way. It's revamped. I don't have anything to do with it. I wish I did. I casted for it, but crickets. But what happens is something like that lets you know what one person can do. When you tie this in to when I do give this house away to a family with kids that's never owned a home before, and they're going to have a fenced in yard and a swing set, when I do that, it'll all go back to the summer of '83 and a Huffy Bandit and a '66 Mustang. And that's how, to me, that's where I tie it back into the success. And, when you bring it back, the car community, by the way, really comes together for stuff like that. And that's what I love about it. Doesn't matter what logo's on the car, what year it is. When something like that happens, people really make it. I mean, it's awesome. That's why I love the car industry and the hot rodding industry.
I think we'll, unless Derek, you've got something to wrap up. I know you and I have been pretty quiet in this. Duane, to me, was a fascinating listen, and I didn't want to interrupt. So,
well, sorry if I talk too much, but
no, I think
I think that's the way. Yeah, that's the way these, the interview shows go. I mean, the reason we bring these, folks on is to hear their story, and it's not, the days that it's just me, Will, and John, people hear enough of us. So we like to have some people on and let them tell their stories.
And let them tell it the way they want to.
Right. Yes. And that's good. And one thing I'll end it with is, I started public speaking a couple years ago, and so it's a good thing I like to talk. But I like trying to bring this story of success for people, not just my story, because you can change my name in this book and put your name in there and write your own story. But I like bringing this to groups of people and tying the motivation into the car community or into a trade group or whatever. So if anyone ever wants me to tell my story and help promote the car industry, the hot rod industry, I'm all for it.
Well, we thank you for being on the show tonight, Duane, and encourage everybody to go visit DuaneCotton.com/driven, or is that /driven? Let me look at my keyboard. /driven, and purchase a copy of the book. It's a thin little book. It's probably a couple day read, in the evening. Mm-hmm. Be quiet, let the wife enjoy some TV show while you're reading the book, and see what he's did. And I'm out of here for the night, guys. My voice is about gone.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
I know Will isn't here, but I guess that just means I need to go look for a Zamboni for sale.